Fair is fair and facts are facts, and this one ain't on SIG. But does that mean all is forgiven? Let's get after it. I'm James Merritt, Emergency Manager and Career Soldier, and this is Readiness Nation. So before we get started, I need to point out that with end-of-year closeout and the holidays, I didn't have time to do scripted content this time, so this is shot entirely from the hip. And I may live to regret this, but we'll see how it goes. You can tell me what you think in the comments section. But there's a whole lot of SIG news we need to get caught up on. And hopefully this is the last time I talk about this, because quite frankly, I'm getting kind of bored with it. But in the interest of intellectual honesty, since I did have a fairly popular video that was predicated on an airman being killed with his own service weapon, I need to now double back around to this topic now that we have all of the information. And as it turns out, that airman was not killed with his own service weapon at all. He was actually killed by another airman with his service weapon. The shooter made up the whole story and pressured two other airmen into lying, corroborating his story to try to get out of trouble. The actual story is that the shooter pointed his service weapon at the deceased airman, apparently as a joke, but somehow the weapon went off. After being charged, the shooter was found dead on post back in October, and his two co-conspirators pled guilty at court-martial and were sentenced in November. So after the confessions of the two co-conspirators, we now know for a fact that this had absolutely nothing to do with the service weapons. The M18, and thusly SIG, at least in this particular case, are completely exonerated. Does that mean all is forgiven and we just trust the P320 now? Well, before I could actually make a video saying that this wasn't on SIG, we had another incident on film of the P320 going off uncommanded. This incident involved a gate guard at the USAA Bank's corporate headquarters in San Antonio. The guard in question exited the guard shack with his hand resting on the weapon while it was in its holster, at which point the weapon very clearly discharged into the ground. The important thing to point out here is that the holster in question fully covers the trigger and trigger guard. So even though the guard's hand was rested on the weapon, there's no possible way that his finger was inside the trigger guard. Now, a lot of people want to make hay about the fact that his hand was rested on the weapon, saying that this was a commanded discharge. But service members walk around resting their hand on their sidearm all the time without it going off. So this is another instance of if you can't use that weapon the same way that everyone else uses every other weapon of that type without there being a major safety concern, that weapon is not fit for duty. I talk about several of these considerations in my video, Are Striker-Fired Pistols Fit for Military Service? Now, on that particular video, it didn't get nearly as much attention because I buried the lead talking about some of your other comments before getting to the point of analyzing how we use sidearms in the military, and then how that is inherently unconducive to a lot of the workarounds that people are saying you need to engage in if you're going to carry a P320. So I strongly encourage you to go back and watch that video, but you may want to skip to the 3-minute and 20-second mark where I actually get to the point. Now, does that mean that all SIGs are bad? I wouldn't go that far. There does appear to be a particular and egregious problem with the P320, but that problem seems to be a variation on a vulnerability that all striker-fire weapons have, even Glocks. As I referenced in my previous video and was proven through the testing of other creators, all striker-fired pistols can have uncommanded discharges if you take all the travel out of the trigger and then change the spatial relationship between the slide and the frame by twisting, tapping, or pressing on the weapon. And like I said, this is every striker-fire weapon, and that includes Glock fanboys. The Trigger Safe video that I referenced in my last video uses a whole host of weapons, including Glocks, and is able to replicate that malfunction in every single one of them. Furthermore, they test this on a Beretta that's a double action to single action pistol, and it doesn't have this problem. So this really is a vulnerability in striker-fired pistols. Now, I'm not saying you need to choose one over the other, but I am saying it's incredibly important that you understand that there's a vulnerability with one weapon system that there isn't with the other. So you can go ahead and carry whatever it is that you want, but if you are in a tactical environment like we are in the military that involves a lot of low crawling, it is entirely plausible that mud, dirt, rocks, foliage can get crammed down into your holster, taking that travel out of the trigger and potentially causing your weapon to discharge when the pressure of your body low crawling on it twists the relationship between the frame and the slide. And for those arguing why hasn't Glock ever had this problem as a service weapon, it's important to point out that the only instance of the US military adopting a Glock is the Navy SEALs back in 2015. But between 2015 and today, overwhelmingly, Navy SEALs have been almost exclusively engaging in direct action raids in support of counterterrorism operations, which doesn't involve a lot of low crawling, and even when it does, it's not through dense foliage and mud that could get crammed down into the holster. So I don't know that Navy SEALs would have had this problem in the field given their mission set over the last 10 years. And furthermore, no combat arms unit carries loaded weapons in garrison. So no combat arms unit would have had this problem just walking around with loaded weapons because we simply don't do it. As such, my particular concerns about striker-fired weapons and military utilization hasn't really necessarily been tested. And as for law enforcement utilization, I don't know that there's a lot of mud or foliage that could get crammed down into holsters when even SWAT is doing their job, tactically speaking, let alone regular beat cops on patrol. So maybe my concerns are unwarranted, or maybe we just haven't gotten to the use case where the failure that I'm talking about would actually manifest. But I'll tell you, after all of this, I personally am far more comfortable with single action to double action hammer-fired pistols. And to that end, for everyone out there who thinks I've been far too hard on SIG, let me tell you, after making all of these videos, I've dug much deeper into SIG's other offerings. And as far as I can tell, SIG's Legion line of weapons is just the venerable P200 series pistols with updated features. That matters because the SIG P226 was the overall performance winner of the M9 trials. It was just too expensive, so the Army went with the Beretta. But the Navy SEALs adopted the P226 as their standard sidearm based on those Army tests. Furthermore, the reliability performance of the P226 in the initial trials back in 1985 not only outperformed every other weapon in the M9 trials, it actually outperformed all of the weapons in the M17 trials. It even outperformed the enhanced version of the M17 that actually got fielded. And being a double action to single action hammer-fired pistol, it's not subject to the failure state that I was talking about before, and that I explained in full technical detail in my previous video. Furthermore, if your use case for your weapons includes the potential for a full collapse event where you'll never see manufactured goods ever again, it's important to point out that the service life of the P226 is 50,000 rounds, whereas the service life of the P320 and most polymer-framed pistols is only 25,000 rounds. Furthermore, P200 series frames have been known to last between 100 and 150,000 rounds before cracking, which is a thing that actually scraps a firearm. So if you have the repair parts, tools, and know-how to be able to do repairs, a P200 series weapon could realistically outlive you. So if SIG is willing to resurrect production of the P224, which is their subcompact P226, as the P224 Legion, and offer all of their full-frame and subcompact P200 pistols and all of the defensive pistol calibers, don't be surprised if in a couple of years you see me hawking P200 series Legions as your best choice in post-apocalyptic arms. But that's going to be it for me. So if you found this information useful, give me the old controlled pair on the like and subscribe buttons. And if you found this information useful enough that you want to buy me a beer about it, there's a link to my Patreon and Subscribe Star in the description. So until next time, this is James Merritt for Readiness Nation, reminding you to always be the master of your fate, the captain of your soul.